I have people reach out to me when they feel like projects just keep dragging and dragging and dragging, that there isn't a clear sense of like, where are we and when are we actually going to be done? Scrum is okay if you have a lot of kind of smaller pieces of well understood work. We have so much clarity around what to actually build that we can just look at staging and then we can have much easier conversations around where we are in the status and where we are in the project and what's next, without having to have all these rituals and meetings. If the quality that's coming out is not what we expected in the beginning, if you're seeing problems like that, then you might find something interesting in here. Not really about slowing down and thinking more, because everybody's thinking. Of course, the designer is thinking when they're working also, It's a question of the order of operations. If we can do the order of operations in a more fitting sequence, if we figure out where the sink goes before we decide on the exact tile in the kitchen, then everything will move faster.
Welcome to Untrapping Product Teams. This is a channel where we get real. Here is not about telling you what you should do. We're gonna talk about things that are sometimes uncomfortable but necessary. And today, to have this great conversation, we have a special guest, Ryan Singer. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hey, David.
It's great to have you here. And for those who are wondering, who's Ryan? He's the author of this book here, Shape Up. And I have something special. Not everyone has that. Mine is signed because I had the pleasure of meeting Ryan in one of the conferences. It was in Cologne. He is great. One of the first employees of 37 Signals. And for me, it's like one of the most authentic tech companies in the world. So, Ryan, what are you doing now? Like you left 37 Signals some time ago. You wrote this great book here. So what are you up to right now?
Well, the book is kind of the link, a lot of people started reaching out to me because they read the book, and there is a gap. There's a gap between reading the book and being like, oh, these things sound great, and actually making them work in a real life company. If you're not exactly like Basecamp or 37 Signals, where you don't have a lot of very senior people who are kind of doing this stuff naturally, there can be some challenges. There are also a few unspoken things, that we didn't even realize that we were doing kind of automatically at the time, So I started having a lot of people coming to me with questions. And then I started to notice patterns, and as I started working with more and more teams to help them do this stuff, I started to realize like, oh, this is actually really interesting. There's a lot here, So it became kind of an expanded version of the framework. I mean, I call it shaping in real life. I've been kind of putting it under that title. And I've been doing a mixture of kind of fractional CPO work where I'm really hands-on with teams, and consulting work where I come in for individual shaping sessions or to review work at different key moments in the life cycle of a project, like framing and shaping moments and stuff like that, and a bit of consulting. So basically just really getting into a huge variety of different companies and situations where people are trying to make this work.
That's awesome. And I see a lot for us to unpack here. And I'm very curious what you have to share. And I would start with one very important question for those wondering, okay, Shape Up, what is it? And so on. I want to ask the important question. What does Shape Up solve better than other frameworks out there? Specifically, one of the most used, Scrum, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I usually start to work backwards and say, if whatever you're doing is fine, then there's nothing better, So if everything is fine, then you're fine. Especially what happens is I have people reach out to me when they feel like projects just keep dragging and dragging and dragging, that there isn't a clear sense of like, where are we and when are we actually going to be done? That there isn't enough alignment, like there's like tensions growing between what business thinks should be happening and what engineering is doing and what product is thinking, so it's like especially teams that remember what it's like to be smaller and faster, they start to kind of have this question of like how did we become so slow, and like what happened to us? You know what I mean? Like we used to be fast and now we're slow. And it's usually because they're a little bit bigger than when they were a small startup, you know. And then what's happened is like projects are dragging, and then also like the quality that's coming out isn't the same as when the founders were totally hands-on, you know, themselves. And so these kind of problems start to appear. And then when these problems start to appear, you know, Scrum is okay if you have a lot of kind of smaller pieces of well understood work, because it's a little bit like a sausage machine, you know? And as long as you kind of turn the machine and individual tickets and issues and pieces of work, things can kind of move through the system and it can work. But if what you're trying to do is you know, new product, new features, like meaningfully different functionality, things that are going to actually kind of influence what's possible in terms of your strategy, you know, like if you're going to do things that are actually going to create growth or be meaningful changes, not just tiny tweaks to the existing product, but meaningful changes to the product, then for those kind of things, you need to have a lot more alignment on what are we actually spending our time on and what are we not spending our time on. So there's this whole piece of like, how do we make sure that the stuff that engineering is working on is actually the stuff that business and sales cares about? And like, how do we kind of create that bridge where we understand the same things are important? And then the other piece is, once we've understood something is important, do we actually have clarity around what we're building? You know, and how do we actually give the teams enough clarity where they understand what it is that they're trying to solve and what it is that they're building, so that they can work without having these constant meetings where we're questioning everything, and these meetings where we are realizing that we still don't actually know what the answer is to what we're building. And you know what I mean? Like basically have a lot more clarity so that the teams can work in a more autonomous way, where they don't need as many meetings and as much hands-on guidance from leadership. You know, it's really about like, how do I create more of this kind of clear connection where leadership, especially the early founders, can still have this kind of hands-on in terms of the decision of what we're spending time on and what we're going after, but step away from all the small in the weeds details of execution. How do we create that? How do we transition into that new world?
I love that. I use this, like if you're doing something like a sausage machine, Scrum is good, but then about clarity, when you need to clarify some things, then Scrum may not help you that much. And that's something that stuck with me now. And I'm thinking here, you mentioned something that many people listening now are done with that. I have too many meetings. How can I do the work? And so on. And I don't have clarity and I still have the meetings. Now, talking about ShapeUp, how does ShapeUp help with this scenario? Like bringing the clarity and having the pace that we will have alignment and create value.
Yeah, so I mean, what often happens is, how do we actually start a project? I mean, like very often we might have some requirements that are written in some kind of a document, but then we have to figure out like, there's so many things that are not said there that have to actually get decided on the spot, you know? And so it can turn into a lot of things that are actually a lot. You can write a few bullet points and think that this is clear direction, but it's not clear enough, you know? And then it can also happen that you have like a whole bunch of Figma files up front, and of course they look beautiful, but then as soon as you start trying to really build them, then again the questions appear, you know? So the key difference is teams that are working in more of a shape-up style are trying to create much more clarity up front around what is this thing and how does it actually work. So you can think of it like if we're building a house, you know, then we can't just build a house thinking 1 week at a time or 2 weeks at a time when we have like a big thing that we have to get to in the end that all makes sense as a whole, you know? So we need to have some kind of a plan of like, what's the architecture of the house? What's the electrical wiring? Where do the pipes go? You know, what's the load bearing structure? There's certain key things that need to get kind of figured out in advance, you know? And then there's a lot of other things like the exact color of the walls and the tiling in the kitchen and the exact faucet fixture. You know, there's all these like smaller things, the specific furniture choices. There's a lot of things that can come later, but the shaping phase is about having a lot of clarity around what is the actual concept of what we're building, you know? And if the team has a lot of clarity around what that is, we say the work is well shaped, And it means that they can actually go into build and they can also make decisions because they understand what it is that they're going to do, you know? And it's not this kind of constantly coming back and saying, what does this mean? And how do I make this decision? And reconsidering the scope and adding more and more scope, you know what I mean? It's about creating that clarity up front.
Creating that clarity. And now, like, how long does it take to create that kind of clarity so teams won't have these question marks when they start building it?
Well, you know, what we usually see is actually kind of two phases that need to happen. And we're already kind of coming into material that's not in the book. It's between the lines of the book, but it didn't have a name at the time, you know? So for example, I'll take the classic example, okay? Like in the book, the example you see very early on is we were working on the Basecamp product and we were getting this request for a calendar. You know, and we had already built a calendar in a previous version of Basecamp. We knew that we didn't want to build a full-featured calendar. We knew that if we built a full-featured calendar, that it wouldn't even be used because we already did it before. We did it on a previous version and the usage was low, but still we were getting all these requests for calendar. And things like this happen all the time, you know, like how many projects have you been on where somebody asked for a dashboard, right? And then you end up building a whole bunch of stuff and then nobody actually uses it in the end. Or you have another really common one is people say, oh, we need notifications, right? Or we need more permissions. And it's like there's these things and they sound like they mean something when you hear them. And there's always a real story behind that. There's a reason somebody's asking for that, you know, that's a real thing. But the thing is that we often don't really know what we mean. You know, like when we say like, I need a calendar, it's like there's a certain story behind that. So like in this case, the example in the book, you know, was that we did some talking to customers, and what we were able to figure out is that when they were asking for calendar, they didn't actually need a calendar. They already had a calendar. You know, they had their Google Calendar and everything like that. What they really needed was they needed a way to be able to see availability for some scarce resources that were being managed inside of the project management universe, you know? So there was some things where they couldn't see the availability. They couldn't see the empty spots. And once we understood, oh, this is about seeing the empty, we need to be able to see the empty available spots. It's not about everything that a calendar can do. Then we were able to shape a 6-week project around that. And we could really like understand, why are we spending time on this? Is it something we want to do? Is it worth doing? You know, similarly, like with dashboard, I just worked with a team where there was a request to improve the dashboard and redo the dashboard. And then instead of just saying, okay, let's go build a dashboard, I started questioning the people who were asking for that. And what we started to surface was actually the problem was that the customers weren't being notified of missed recurring payments. This was actually in a recurring business model. This it was a SaaS for a very certain vertical, and they weren't able to handle failed recurring payments, you know? And it turned out that like this came up as like, oh, like we need a better dashboard because we're not seeing the failed payments there. But then even if we made a better dashboard to show the failed payments, we realized that the app didn't give you actions to actually do anything about the failed payments. Like we didn't have retry actions and we didn't have clear logging about like when I tried and when it didn't work. And like they didn't have like a button that I could trigger a new email to the customer to tell them that their subscription is failing and stuff like that, you know? So what started as dashboard turned into actually fixing payment recovery for failed subscription payments, you know? Whoa. And so this work is, now I use the word framing for this, and we have a lot of teams who are using this word framing. It means framing what is the actual problem and what is the opportunity. So when somebody says dashboard, can I turn that into this is what's going wrong today, and this is why this is an opportunity, and this is what we're going to try to fix, right? So this framing piece, it's more from the business perspective. It's less about the exact UI and technical architecture. It's more like, is this something we want to solve? And I'm sure like you've encountered this a lot, where there's a million things that we might do, and there's a conversation that has to happen. A team is going to become free or a project is ending. How do we make the decision around what to invest in next, right? It's totally in the realm of framing. So can I make a clear case This is a problem I understand. It's a problem that's worth spending time on. This is something we want to solve next. Okay. Now, framing ends with, here is a gap in the world. Here's the hole, and here's the thing that's not working in the current world, where if we could do something with a project here, we think it would be worthwhile. And it seems, that there's something we could do here within our time budget. There's something we believe is possible, let's say within 6 weeks or whatever the time unit we're willing to commit to solve this. So this is a sort of, you can think of it like the first checkpoint of, are we actually having the conversation across business, sales, and engineering leadership of like, what is actually the most important thing to solve next? What's the problem that matters the most? That's the framing piece. Then, now if we've actually aligned on, we're not building a calendar, we're building something to help see the available spaces, or we're not building the new dashboard, we're actually building better payment recovery support, Now we kind of know what it is that we're trying to solve. And then when we go into shaping, that's going to be different people doing different work. So we need to have somebody who understands the product and business story around why this thing matters. So whoever did the framing work is going to be there in the shaping session. But now the shaping is more about, what are the different technical design approaches we can take? So from a back-end perspective, from a wiring perspective, from a UI concept perspective, what could we actually do here, to solve it? And there's going to be ideas A, B, C, and D. Just like if you want to go, if you think you want to go buy a car, there's a lot of different options. There's this kind of shopping process, right? And you have a certain budget, and you have certain requirements, and a reason why you're car shopping right now, instead of, I don't know what, shopping for a new apartment or shopping for, something else that's major. You're car shopping. So there's some framing around like, this is why we need to actually buy the car now. This is why we can't just continue with the old one or continue without one. We more or less have a budget in mind, but there's still like a million problems to solve, right?
Yeah.
To actually get to the point of which car are we buying. So that's kind of what's happening in the shaping. It's what we usually see here is live whiteboarding sessions, where somebody who understands what's technically possible, somebody who can think through this from an interaction standpoint, and somebody who understands the frame from the business and sort of value standpoint, these heads are together, and we're wireframing live and sketching out different flows of like, how could we actually solve this problem? And what's going to happen is, if very often what you see is, without this kind of clear shaping session, what we often see is like a designer will do a Figma file, but they didn't really understand the business story, and they didn't really understand what's technically possible. So then once all that work is done, you have to blow it up and change it and start over anyway, right? Or the engineers start and they don't totally understand the business edge cases, and they don't think about the interaction, and then you get a whole bunch of stuff built that again you have to change, and it doesn't work, or it goes in the wrong direction. What we want to do is cut off all of those wrong paths as early as possible. It doesn't mean that we can solve every little detail, but we want to surface the major unknowns and be able to find out about what do we not know and what do we actually have to solve in order for this thing to be viable. We want to solve those things as early as possible. So we don't let any one person who only has one part of the story go really far down, and then have to go backwards again. So the shaping session is usually what we see is, sometimes we see like 1 or 2 kind of intense 2 or 3 hour sessions. Sometimes for a really challenging project, we might see 5 or 6 different sessions, But what you have is, we've got a clear understanding of the problem we're trying to solve from the frame. We've got alignment from business that this is, out of the 10, 20 things we could do next, this is our top choice of what we want to do next. So now we're investing in the shaping. So we've got a senior technical person, the interaction person, and a business of somebody who understands the business value together in that session, and we're actually figuring out, can we get to a concept where we say, this is something that if I gave this to a build team, they would be able to start working. Doesn't mean that every tiny little question is answered. It's not a complete spec necessarily, but we're really asking ourselves, is this clear enough that I can actually go give this? Think about if you invite some contractors to build a house. you can't just invite them to build a house if you don't know what you want. You know what I mean? And you can't give the contractors bullet points, right? And if you give them an unrealistic 3D rendering, you know what I mean, that doesn't have all the architectural concerns in it answered, right? You know, that also doesn't work. So what we're getting to is like, did we get to a place where we can actually give this to a team and they're going to understand it and they're going to be able to run with it, you know? So that's kind of the next checkpoint. So the framing is on the business side and the shaping is on the solution side. So there can be a couple framing sessions, but those are with usually different people. You know, it's more on the business and customer side. And then there's going to be maybe a few shaping sessions where they're very intense, very deep sessions where we're getting to an overall architecture, we're getting to a clear concept of what this is. And then the last checkpoint, if we once we get to a point of like, yes, this is what we want, yes, we understand it, and we know what it is that we're going to go build, you know, then we can have a kickoff. And that's where we can say, now we're dedicating, for example, 6 weeks of time. Usually 6 weeks is a practical upper limit for a single push. And then say it can be less also. It can be 3 weeks, might be 2 weeks, you know, but we usually see the sweet spot being 3 to 6. Then when we have a very clear shaped concept, we can give that to a build team. We can have a kickoff together. We can answer questions about it. And then they understand what this is and they can start working. And because we've created that clarity, now instead of babysitting and answering questions constantly, you know, for the next 6 weeks, we have a team that's focused on a single effort. We have alignment in the business that this is what's important, so people aren't interrupting them. And they have the clarity that they can do huge pieces of work without having to come back for questions or ask what about this and what about that, you know? So of course there's still review and there's still a little bit of answering questions, but I mean, it's night and day, the difference between having all of these. So for example, in a shape up world, we don't have regularly scheduled meetings. We don't have a daily meeting. We don't need the weekly meeting. We have so much clarity around what to actually build that we can just look at staging or look at we can run the what's actually being built and look at and see the progress, you know, and then we can have much easier conversations around where we are in the status and where we are in the project and what's next, you know, without having to have all these rituals and meetings.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really clear explanation, and you touched upon many things I want to ask you. The framing is a problem understanding, like, and this part is what is implicit in the book, right? It's part of shaping in the book. So you clarify that in the book. We have shaping and then we have building, but the framing is what you made it even more prominent and clearer. Like what I see from this, like, do we know what we are solving? So what is the real problem here? And then once you clarify that, you know what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to solve, then you move to the shaping and saying like, how are we going to solve that? Which would be the best way? And then you do together with some more people. And then once you say, we have figured out how we could solve, let's build it.
This is a perfect time to introduce you all to Usersnap, your centralized platform from problem exploration to impact planning. From discovery to triage to prompting prototypes and to announcing new chains, Usersnap helps you turn feedback into forward motion. Now, powered by AI, Usersnap categorizes feedback instantly, analyze sentiment and topic trend to surface high-priority initiatives, and even generates hypotheses and solutions that can be sent to prototype tools for your team to test faster. Unlike static feedback repositories, Usersnap is a feedback hub sending targeted microservice to the right users in the right moment and enriched with user segment context. And unlike basic survey or bug reporting tools, Usersnap integrates and guides you along the PDLC, helping you evaluate opportunities, align customers and stakeholders, and track progress in real time so that you can deliver real value all in one place. Get started with exclusive templates crafted by product leaders like Leah Tarin, Anthony Murphy, and Pavel Horing. Make smarter decisions with clarity. Usersnap, find opportunities worth building.
Yes, and it's not only how we can solve it, but also the framing helps us to answer, does this solve it or not? Because the thing is, if you're just supposed to build a dashboard, then you build something that looks like a dashboard and you say, well, how do we know if we solved it? Well, I don't know. Does it look like a dashboard? Right? Or what happens is people say, we need notifications. And you're like, well, how do we know if we're done building notifications? And then you get into these, these like really crazy conversations about like, well, what's the real definition of a notification? You know what I mean? Like, is it a notification if, right? And then you're far away from reality when you have those kind of conversations, So if instead we have, look, like, this is a situation where the business owner is literally missing out on recurring revenue because they didn't realize the payment failed, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the workflow that needs to happen so that they are aware of that and they can take action on it? And what are the different states where it goes wrong? And now we have almost like, you can think of the framing almost like a unit test, or an acceptance test on the whole 6-week effort, right? So like if the thing that we shape works, does it make the frame go green or is the frame still red? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right? So and then the same thing kind of with the framing is also giving us that clarity around like, is it actually doing what it needs to do or not? And the other thing that's really key is that there's always more and more scope appearing because it's really hard to make trade-offs and say no to things when you're building a project, So if we're working on the calendar, somebody's going to say, oh, like, shouldn't we have different color coding and shouldn't we have like better interactions for dragging the edges of these events? And then when we have a very tight frame, like, no, but this isn't about general calendar use cases. This is just about seeing empty spaces. Then you're like, oh, so I should be thinking more about like booking a haircut than a Google Calendar, Yeah. And then you ask yourself, like, is color coding important when I'm booking a haircut? Like, no, I just need to know what are the available times. Right? So it helps you when you really have that clarity to make those judgment calls about like what's in scope and out of scope.
That's awesome. So what I take from this, you move from something very abstract and potentially misunderstood to something concrete that enables you to make better decision for what you are solving.
Yes.
Because you are not building a dashboard, you are enabling this to happen.
Right.
So you are solving. That's great. That's great.
And then the other thing is that we have this, as you said, this transition from abstract to concrete has high costs attached to it. Because if we don't get the concrete clarity and we invest in something that's fuzzy, that's when projects drag and we go in circles and the scope gets out of control and all these things happen. So a big part of this, and this is also where distinguishing framing from shaping is helpful, is as a business. I mean, as a group of people who are trying to do something together, we need to be able to incrementally invest in something in such a way that we're getting warmer and warmer and closer, and not where we spend a whole bunch of time on something and then find out it wasn't right and throw it away and start over. Or we put a whole bunch of time in something and then we realize that like, oh, but we actually need to be doing this other thing and then take a right turn. What we want instead is, out of the 10 things we might be doing, what is the most... So imagine we create the alignment on the framing. So this is the first thing, is that to narrow down out of all the things we might be doing, what is really most important. And then imagine it's not just engineering working on something and then you're in the middle of a deep project and all of a sudden sales is saying, no, I need you to work on this other thing, right? Or the CEO is saying, oh, I got this new idea in the shower this morning. If we aligned on the frame, meaning sales agrees, CEO agrees, engineering leadership agrees. If we've done that work of wrestling with, is this actually the most important thing at a framing stage? Now, if we go into shaping and we have some hard questions around, infrastructure or the technical approach, or is this the right interaction approach, whatever it is, we're solving that kind of with the blessing of the org that like we're working on the right thing.
Yeah.
Right? So if I also need to go tap somebody's shoulder, if I need the DevOps guy to go help me with this because it has to do with some events and we don't currently do this event triggering in Redis right now, like I'm going to get support from people to have that person's time because there's alignment that this is what's important. You know what I mean? But then at the same time, we might not actually know if this is possible the way that we imagine it. So I think a lot of teams are experiencing this right now where they frame something that's like, we're going to use AI to blah, blah, blah. And then it turns out that there isn't actually a magic wand to just use AI to blah, 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 right? So you can have this idea that we're aligned on spending time on this, but we don't actually know if we have a viable path yet, right? So that's where the shaping checkpoint is like let's go deeper into the concreteness of this from a technical standpoint, and not just from an interface standpoint, but from an implementation standpoint, right? Do we actually understand how to wire this so it does what we think we need it to do? Then we can also, this is where we can either say, yes, this is becoming realer, this is becoming something we can do that we understand, or actually, when we try to shape this, we're discovering that it's either harder than we thought, or the tech doesn't work as magically as we thought, or those APIs don't actually communicate the way that we imagined, or do you know what I mean? So what we want to be able to do is also kind of blow up a project earlier in its life cycle from a viability standpoint or from a solutioning standpoint, So that's also what's happening. So then if we've gone through framing, we've gone through shaping, and frame is go, shape is go, and we're ready for kickoff. I mean, this is a very qualified piece of work, right?
Yes.
And that's the thing. I think a lot of people who are attracted to the shape up way of working, they start to have this light bulb where they see the difference between this work that's very qualified, that's kind of gone through this gauntlet, of alignment and making sure it's something we understand, and is it real, and then that's something that's actually more downhill that we can expect to happen, versus just saying yes to things that we don't really understand what they are.
No, that's awesome. And one thing that comes to mind, I'll tell you a story. When I read the book, Shape Up, I said, this is awesome. I was a Scrum guy. How? I don't know. I landed in Scrum, but I changed many things there. I adapted. And it was sometimes called as the organized chaos way of working, because we ditched a few things from Scrum, used a little bit here. Then I wanted to introduce Shape Up. And then people look at me, come on, David. This 37 Signals is a small company, and we have here hundreds of developers. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work. So I faced resistance, and people laughed at me. We've end up overcoming that, but I want to know your perspective, because now you are out of 37 Signals and you are working with different companies and so on. Is it myth or reality that Shape Up is only for small teams? So
I think maybe the question is actually, there's a difference between team size and org size. So the thing is, as an org, if I want something to happen, I need to be able to deploy a team to go do that thing. And then if I have a team who needs to go and produce an outcome, then there's a bunch of different options for how's that team going to actually work. Right? If from a leadership standpoint, I don't feel that I can have a conversation about what is important to the business and then get alignment. Yes, this is important. We should go do that. And then in 6 weeks later, see that thing actually working. If I can't do that today, then what I need to do is find a solution. Right? So if you're in a situation where you can aim at something and say, like, I want that to happen, and then some version of that happens, then everything is fine. But if that's not working, then what we need is some tools to help us understand what can I do differently. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to go and work like Basecamp does. But what you're probably going to notice is if you start to debug what's going on in a particular team's workflow, you might notice, we didn't actually define the problem very clearly. We were telling them dashboard, right? And then if you look more closely and you say, we had a pretty clear defined problem, but we didn't actually have a concept of how we were going to implement it, right? And the team got there were a million, there were some, let's say, sometimes I call them time bombs, these ticking time bombs. It, turns out actually there's a bunch of legacy code in that part. It turns out there's actually 3 other conditions you need to think about. You know what I mean? These hidden complexities, right? So the thing is, this isn't really about shape up. This is more just like physics. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to sell anybody on shape up. This is more like what I usually talk about in shaping in real life is look, if we don't have any kind of a budget in terms of time, it's going to be really hard to work backwards and make trade-offs. You know, if we don't have a clear definition of what the problem is, how are we going to evaluate if solution A, B, or C is better or worse? How are we going to come to agreement? You know, so these things need to have answers no matter how you work. You know, and then if you're feeling these problems, and then you want to be able to make more progress and basically have a, what do you call it? It's like you want to be able to set expectations and meet those expectations. You know, like, yes, we're going to do that thing, and then go work on it and say, we looked into it. It's actually shaped. Now it's really happening. So we got the alignment. Now it's really happening. And then 6 weeks later, come back and say, it's working. You know, if you want to do that, then I think I think these things are quite universal, actually. You know, I think these principles are actually quite universal. And there's a lot of latitude in specifically how you do it and how you implement it. And I think this is where there's a big difference between waving the book around and saying, this is the Bible and this is what the guys at 37 Signals did and la la la, you know what I mean? And I don't think that's really nice to create the light bulb. It's really nice to inspire. And I think they've always done a really good job of lighting the way to show, hey, there's another way that's possible, you know? Yeah. And they're also really good at kind of bringing some principles and big opinions to the table. But what we really need if we want to make this work in a real org, including larger orgs, is just that tactical perspective of, you know, what's not going right? What do I need to solve? Why do I need to solve it? And then, okay, can I get some tools in my hands so that, you know, what can I do to make the team more clear before we actually invest in the team building something? Oh, you know, maybe we could do some kind of framing. And there's going to be a lot of different ways to actually go about that. But just having the language and the clarity around that work step is, I think, proving to be something a lot of people are saying, yes, that's something that helps me.
Oh, this is awesome. And relates a lot to the story I shared, because I stepped back then and I looked, what is the biggest pain we have? And it was called prioritization. Everything mattered equally. And then I said, okay, let's take some inspiration from the book. And I love the betting table there. So saying like, okay, so we have all of these cool things here. So let's understand the one we should proceed with, and so on. And then we started from there and reflecting on what you just said. It is about alignment, clarity, prioritization. And we need to have these things somehow. We need to align, we agree on going this, then we clarify, okay, makes sense, and that's what it means, and now let's prioritize. Because if we don't have that, actually it doesn't matter the organization size. It will create confusion. So without alignment, clarity, and prioritization, teams will be confused, stretched too thin, and so on. And then it's not about the framework itself. It is about having clarity where we're going and why we're going there.
Yeah, and the thing is, the bigger the impact, the more alignment we need. You know, you don't need a lot of alignment to go solve a ticket that you can solve in 2 hours, right? You just go do it. But as soon as it becomes into, I need multiple people to all be working on the same thing, and I need them to be focused on that together for a period of weeks, you know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, unbroken. If I need that kind of integration in order to move the needle and actually make progress on this particular effort, then I need to have a lot more alignment and clarity in order for that to really happen. So I think what you often see is that a lot of teams are swimming in a million tickets, you know, and the place where there's more struggle is how do we actually integrate to do the bigger things, you know, and this is where these tools can be very helpful.
What I like about this is the clarity. The bigger the impact, the bigger the alignment. What happens sometimes is trying, you know, kind of, you give a hammer to people and then everything becomes a nail. So you don't need to do this for everything you mentioned. If it takes just 2 hours, okay, just go and do it. So it's simple. You don't need to talk. But what if we're talking about 2 months? That's a very different conversation. And I like the clarity of that. Very important. And what I want to ask you as one of our last questions here is like, many teams keep following advice. There are many advice there on LinkedIn. It's for free. You just open there. Everyone is going to tell you what are all the things that you should be doing.
There's a lot of people trying to sell things on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, everything is there, so you can find all the advice. Some people would disagree with everything we talked. They say, "Why are you doing all of this? AI can just build it and you check." So that would be even another conversation. But what I want to ask you, what are kind of outdated advice you keep seeing teams following and unintentionally ending up in undesired situation?
One thing that I see, so the world that I know well is the world of founders who started to bring in more and more people, and now they can't just do things automatically anymore, or organically. So this is the world that I know best, is like we used to be small, and we used to just kind of somehow everything magically happened. And now we've hired more people, and it's like, why did it get hard and why did it get slow? And like, why aren't things working the way they used to? And in that world, one thing that usually happens is the person who, so there's usually somebody on like kind of the business side and the tech side, kind of a CEO and CTO. There's usually these two people are somehow there from the beginning. And what starts to happen is they both get busy with a whole bunch of other things, and they don't feel like they can really be involved in what's the next project and, you know what I mean, like those hands-on things anymore. And what I see is that they notice that they don't seem to have time to be hands-on involved anymore. It's not happening magically anymore. And there's more people and everything seems to be taking longer. And what they often imagine is that they should be hiring a PM and somehow delegating this work. And I would say the biggest thing that people should be aware of, that's a really common misunderstanding, is that if you are trying to make a decision about what are your engineers and designers and like what are we going to focus our time on for the next 6 weeks? How many 6 weeks do you get in a year? Not that many, right? That is a major expense. It's a major investment. If we are what are we going to spend that time on? And if you think that you're going to hire a PM who's going to answer that for you, that PM shouldn't be a PM. That PM should have a C in front of their title. So what usually happens is we don't think enough about what really are the expectations I have for the strategic contribution of the person that I'm bringing in, And it's not reasonable to invite a PM and think that they're going to give you double-digit growth curve on things. Do you know what I mean? So if you bring in a PM, there are a lot of things that they can do, but it's going to be more about making sure that the existing system runs. It's going to be more sustaining. It's going to be like, what are the worst bugs? What are the little things that we can do here and there, And then there are going to be PMs who are, the very skilled PMs are going to help you to really dig in and understand a problem from that framing point of view like we talked about. But if a PM is actually figuring out what to go frame and what is really an opportunity and finding things that are like strategically important, I mean, that's leadership. That's not a PM, that's a leadership responsibility. So one of the things, that's a key one, is what you want to do as a founder who is in a newly bigger company, is you want to be able to retain, you should still be responsible for the big decisions, And what you want is to be able to be more involved in very important moments and less involved in the details of execution. And so what we've been talking about like these specific work steps of framing and shaping is like, how can I be really involved for 3 hours and then not involved for 3 weeks? You know what I mean? That is the better way to get through that bottleneck. The one other thing that is absolutely outdated that we see incredible results with when we do this differently is Figma upfront and high fidelity upfront. We are seeing amazing results when we do high fidelity last. If you work on the wiring and the interactions and the what connects to what, and I click here and then this happens and then I go here, and how is it wired Now, there are experience decisions involved in that, right? But the deliverable is not this specific color in this specific pixel, right? The deliverable is more like a breadboard or a wiring diagram. It's more like the architecture of the house. And that architecture of the house, if you have contractors building a house, they don't need to know the color of the tile to put the sink where it should be. They don't need to know the color of the tile to put the pipes where they should be, right? To put the foundation where it should be. So there's so much work that can happen, and we can unlock so much progress if we have a very clear, let's say, wiring diagram that's vertical from interaction all the way down to back end without making the final call about the exact component and placement and styling. And when we do that, our great artists, when we have designers who are really good artists, they can come in and they can give us a beautiful update of the raw ugly version to the beautiful version, and we can turn it around without it not matching, without having to throw things out of it, without having to throw away their work. But we can have a one-to-one matching where exactly what they gave us gets built, and it's like, wow, now it looks amazing. And I'm seeing just an incredible results when we make that. It's a giant, it seems backwards, but we can make so much more progress when we don't need a Figma to begin with, and we treat the Figma as the polishing layer later on. By the way, it's the same thing with vibe coding prototypes. If you vibe code a prototype in Lovable, what you're getting is a mixture of a Figma file and a wired prototype. And the thing that's really dangerous there is that when things look pretty, it's really easy to overlook functional problems, right? So you look at the Lovable and you're like, oh, wow, it looks amazing. Let's just go build it. And then you're week 2 into building and you're like, oh, but what about this and what about this? And there's this other state and this business logic we didn't think about. And you know what I mean? So the teams that I see who are doing this well, so number 1, Figma last, not Figma first. Number 2, if you do a Lovable prototype, you throw the prototype away when you're done, and you extract the architecture from it. So you figure out what you want in the Lovable prototype, but then you can draw a breadboard and you can draw the wiring of what we're going to build based on that, and then because it's in the wiring that you really see those time bombs and all of those hidden complexities.
Wow. That's so much wisdom in this answer. I think this is worth really gold. So just unpacking here about leaders. You need to choose where to be involved. I love that you made it simple to understand. How many 6 weeks of investment do you have a year? It's not even 10. But you do need to ensure that you make the decisions what goes there. So instead of investing this 6 week on the execution and so on, you do need the hours to make the decision and understand. I love that. So also, if you're bringing a PM, an early stage startup, maybe actually it's not a PM you need. Maybe it's a CPO, something like that, C-level.
No, what I really mean is usually what you don't need, you usually don't need anybody. What you need, what you need is to stay involved. But in a more targeted way. You see?
Powerful. Yes.
And it might be that you bring in a PM. It might be, but what I tell you, what's happening again and again is people bring on the PM and they come to me and they're saying, I thought that I could offload this to them and I can't. And I feel like something's wrong with me or wrong with them, or did I hire the wrong person? And I'm saying to them, you can't expect a PM to do that. You can't offload your strategic decisions as a founder to a PM. It doesn't make sense, No. And then they're like, oh, thank you. Because then what they realize, a lot of people have this feeling of like, my PM isn't good, or my ICs aren't contributing as much as I thought. And it's actually just a mismatch of expectations. There is so much fantastic work and hard work that needs to get done at the detail level, And so that when you bring more people in, it's going to work better if you stay involved as a leader on setting the direction. What you want is to more and more back off of the detail and then bring people in where you're giving them clarity, but they are making more of their own judgment calls at the detail level.
Lovely, lovely. And I also love the second part you had in your answer, because what I say is like slowing down the thinking and understanding. high fidelity later. So you start by understanding the flow, clarifying, and so on. Because what I love about it is like today, many people are looking for speed. So let's just get it done and so on and so on. I can prompt that here. Lovable is going to give me everything. But I think that the ones that are slowing down are the ones who can stand out now. Because creating more things that don't work, it's not going to help anybody. So we need to do the thinking. And that takes time.
Yeah, you described it as slowing down, but that's not what happens. What happens is in the old world, we were very slow because we were waiting for the Figma. And I tell you, there's a lot of waiting and back and forth because the designers, they're putting their heart and soul into every little detail. They're having design review sessions where they don't have enough clarity around the requirements. So the sessions are going in circles. Usually this design process is taking a lot of time. So the whole team is stuck waiting for this deliverable. And when we make the shift to figuring out what are the actual pillars of the house, and then we figure that out, and then we literally just start building. So what happens is we're moving faster. So we don't we've gotten rid of this illusion that, that I know I need this Figma to know what to do. Like we already know what to do if we understand this in terms of the actual build, the interaction and the wiring. We can just start building, and then what you'll see is, massive jumps in speed. Instead of waiting for weeks to get final asset, final version 23, final assets, like. We literally can just we can meet, we can work, and then we can start building, and we're not blocked.
You're right. Yeah, I used the word slow down, but I meant like slow down the thinking so you can get it through. So actually what I am saying, invest the proper time, the needed time to do the thinking, because in the end it will pay off. And I see what you meant. It will be faster. So that's
the real shift is less about doing. It's not really about slowing down and thinking more, because everybody's thinking. Of course, the designer is thinking when they're working also, It's a question of the order of operations. If we can do the order of operations in a more fitting sequence, if we figure out where the sink goes before we decide on the exact tile in the kitchen, then everything will move faster.
Lovely. Ryan, it has been so much wisdom for everyone listening. It's awesome. So how can people best connect to you and gain more insights from what you have to share?
Well, that's easy. The website is ryansinger.co, and you find me on X and LinkedIn and stuff like that. But easiest is just go straight to the website, and it's also possible to sign up if you want to get email updates and stuff like that. And just especially, if any of this kind of sounded interesting and you have like follow-up questions, feel free just to write me. Like, I love hearing from what's going on with people. I love hearing about people's questions. And I'd be happy to just take a little time to talk and, see if I can fill in any gaps.
Lovely. And all the links will be shared so you can find it easier. So Ryan, thanks a lot for everything you shared.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Great. So for everyone who enjoyed this one, you can subscribe and you're going to get more insights. And together we keep untrapping product teams.